Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rollenbacher, and this is a television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And just as a reminder, this is a viewer-supported show, so if you want to support resources like this show, visit reasons.org/2819.
And for all of you watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Keep up to date on all the videos that RTB is putting out.
And you can also keep up to date with us by checking us out on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show.
And don't forget, the podcast version of 2819 is now available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just go to those and search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
And now it's time for a quick rundown of what's happening on the show today. In our Nexus segment, we're going to hear from Mary Jo Sharp, and she's going to talk about how we can respond to the problem of evil.
And in RTB 101, Krista will be talking with Jeff Zweerink, answering the question, are we alone in the universe?
Ooh, good question. In our RTB News segment, Monica will be talking with Hugh Ross about Creation Day 4.
And make sure you stick around to watch that so you can get the special promo code.
Definitely, you want that promo code.
Yeah.
In our Give and Take segment, Jeff will talk with particle physicist Mike Strauss, and he'll ask him why he views the Big Bang as the strongest evidence for Christianity.
But first we have Culture Talk. Sandra will be interviewing Krista Bontrager, asking a really important question, is the Bible sexist? Let's go check that one out.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Krista Bontrager. Thank you so much for joining us, Krista.
Happy to be here.
You are a theologian, and you are also the director of
the scholar community here at Reasons to Believe. That's right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about kind of a tricky topic and something that's prompting it. You know, there's a wildly popular show out there called The Handmaid's Tale, and I've seen it, and it's a really interesting premise. The premise is that we're looking at this future where we have this harshly patriarchal society, and the people living in the society, the men who are leading this society, are really prompted by their version of biblical texts. And I thought, wow, we need to talk about this because that is a narrative that some people have, that the Bible is extremely sexist in devaluing women. So let's unpack that.
Yes.
How would you respond to a skeptic's criticism that the Bible is sexist?
Well, I always love to begin that conversation with Jesus and looking at how Jesus interacts with women, because he did so many things that were countercultural. Jesus comes to us in the middle of a patriarchal culture, the Jewish culture, and also in the middle of the Greco-Roman culture, both patriarchal cultures. And Jesus does so many things that are counterintuitive to what he should have done in a patriarchal culture and how he treated women.
Right. So then, you know, I love that you're talking about Jesus was doing things that were countercultural, and there's evidence of that.
Yeah.
There's biblical examples of that. But let's look at the Old Testament when we think of verses like Genesis 3:16, where it says, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." So how do we think about verses like that?
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start because Genesis, I think, is the foundation of so much of our thinking as Christians. In Genesis chapter 1, it says that both the man and the woman were created in the image of God. And this forms the foundation of the idea of the inherent dignity, value, and worth for both men and women. Men are not more important or more valuable than women, and women are not more important or more valuable than men. Rather, that we're equal partners to co-rule and reign the earth. But then something terrible happens in Genesis chapter 3, and that is the fall. The man and the woman fall into sin. And that verse that you mentioned is actually part of the curse. And so many scholars have made the point that patriarchy and the patriarchal system might be a distortion or a result of the fall. And that what Jesus is, or what God's pronouncing there, is a declaration of what will be, but not his ideal.
Right. So a deviation from God's ideal.
Yeah.
Right. So then now let's go back to Jesus. You talked about Jesus being countercultural.
Yeah.
But yet in the New Testament, we have like verses from Ephesians 5:22, wives, submit yourselves to your husband.
Yes.
And
what do we do with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, Ephesians 5:22, it says that. But what's really important is what our friend Greg Koukl likes to say from Stand to Reason. He has a great phrase that says, never read a Bible verse. And I love that, because you never want to read a Bible verse all by itself or in isolation. And if we look right above that verse in Ephesians 5:21, Paul is setting the stage for his case that he's going to make. And he says, submit yourselves to one another. And then what he does is this brilliant thing of using what's called household codes that were known in the Greco-Roman world, outlining relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, masters and slaves. But notice that the big umbrella statement is submitting yourself to one another first. So the Christian paradigm of all relationships is one of love and mutuality. So whatever verse 22 says, whatever submission looks like, therefore wives submit to your husbands, it has to be consistent with an ethic of love. It's not about demanding respect. You must do this. Here's what respect must look like. Rather, it's in the context of love. And what love looks like is that it's patient, it's kind, it's gentle. And so when we are interacting with one another, we want to conduct ourselves as Jesus did.
Right. And speaking of how Jesus conducted himself, can you give kind of a specific example of, again, how Jesus was countercultural?
Yeah, one of my favorites is Luke chapter 10, the story of Mary and Martha. Jesus goes to Mary and Martha's house. And what's interesting is that Luke chapter 10 is a pivotal passage about discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? Jesus sends out the 72 and they heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead. Right after that, Jesus goes to visit Mary and Martha. And what's interesting is Martha is very busy with the house, engaging in typical women hospitality roles of this is how we care for someone when a person of prominence comes to our home. But Mary does something totally different. She sits at the feet of Jesus. Many preachers, I hear this preached, is like, well, she's just sort of resting there and gazing at Jesus. But really, that's a euphemism for she's acting as a disciple. She's sitting at Jesus's feet. A way we could say that, a way that Ben Witherington and Craig Keener, two very prominent New Testament scholars, have said, she's engaging kind of in man's work. That men were supposed to be the disciples and women were the hospitality people. But in this case, Mary is engaging in the best work of all, which is being a disciple of Jesus. So it's not just a man's world there in Luke chapter 10. It's not just the men who are sent out. The women are included as Jesus's disciples.
Amen. I love that example. And I wish that more people would just be aware of that, because it's so beautiful to think that we can also be, and we are supposed to be, disciples of
That's
Christ.
right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Krista. So if you'd like to hear more from Krista, visit reasons.org and search Krista Bontrager. She has countless articles on various topics, all really good content. Next, we're going to head to our Nexus segment. We're going to hear from Mary Jo Sharp, and she's going to talk about how we can encounter the problem of evil. Let's check it out.
So ask questions, though. What do you mean by that? Or I say sometimes, well, do you mean to say that? And then I place the objection into a clarified form. I place it into a simpler or a refined format. A format that both you and your objector understand. So here's an example. Do you mean to say that you do not understand how God can be perfectly good if an evil, such as you experienced, is present in the creation? Do you mean to say you don't understand how God can be good if an evil such as what you experience is present in this creation? Or you might say, do you mean to say a perfectly good God is not compatible with presence of any evil? Help clarify, right? Help clarify the objection. You may need to follow up with, tell me what you mean when you say something is good or evil. And I frequently use this in conversation. I frequently tell people, well, what do you mean when you're saying good and evil? What do you mean by that? Tell me what that is to you. And I also follow up with, how do you know that? So what do you mean good and evil, and then how do you know that? Remember, we can't make assumptions. So part of refining the objection is not only to find out how the objector understands their objection by asking questions, clarifying it by, again, asking them more questions. Do you mean to say this? But also we need to remember we're trying to avoid assumption. Right? You're going to hear something that sounds like the problem of evil, and you might launch into a full explanation of the moral law. Right? And really, they're just like, no, I need a hug. I really just need a hug. Okay? We want to avoid assumptions. There's another kind of assumption that we make. And I say this with a great love for people, but sometimes people don't understand their own argument. They don't. Sometimes they don't know what they're saying. They're just repeating mantra, or they're repeating what they've heard from, or what they read in a book, or a quick soundbite. So it's very important to clarify and refine the argument if we care about helping people discover truth. And another reason for this, and this was mentioned last night beautifully by Sarah, we do not want to put people on the defensive. Right? We don't want to put people on defensive. Most people that I encounter go into defensive mode when they recognize a deficiency in their knowledge. Okay? Especially in their knowledge or understanding of an important subject or a sensitive subject, like the problem of evil. Once they go into defensive mode, here's what happens to them. They're using all of their emotional and intellectual energy to defend themselves. They're feeding the defensiveness. That's where their energy is going, rather than thinking clearly through the issue. We want to free them up from that so that we can have a real conversation on the problem of evil.
And once again, I want to encourage you to get connected with our friend Mary Jo Sharp over at Confident Christianity and find out more about the important work that she's doing. And now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help equip you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And I'm here once again with my colleague and physicist, Dr. Jeff Zweerink. Welcome back.
Krista, it's good to be here again.
Yeah. So, recent blog post that you made, very provocative title. Mm-hmm. Maybe we are alone in the universe. So let's talk about it, because very important question when we're talking to our non-Christian friends, when we just look at the numbers, the vastness of the universe. There's a lot of planets out there, a lot of stars, a lot of galaxies. Just statistically speaking, it seems like we might not be alone in the universe. Help us think this through a little bit.
Well, that's it's kind of informed by two things. One is that we've recently started finding planets, and as we look at that, it says that just in our galaxy alone, there's probably 400 billion planets the size of Earth, which that's more than one per star. So that's really an enormous amount. And then you also have this Drake equation where people have used to kind of quantify, at some level, quantify our ignorance, but give us a path to investigate. And if you plug in some numbers to that, you get that there are many civilizations. And so it says certainly there's lots of planets out there. But there's kind of indications that maybe we are alone, because the conditions that life requires are really pretty exacting. And so maybe we're alone, maybe we're not.
So when we think about this from a biblical point of view, like, where's the place we want to plant our flag in the ground? Is it that we're totally alone in the universe? Or what does the Bible have to say about life on other planets?
Well, and to me, that, as a Christian, that's the key question, is what does the Bible have to say about this? And as I read and studied what people have to say, what I've recognized that Christians have thought a lot about this throughout the centuries even. I mean, this is not a new discussion for us. But there are devout Christians who've come down and said, yeah, there's other life in the universe. And there are devout Christians who say, yeah, we're the only life in the universe. And really the key questions in my mind is, like, if we find other life, how would that impact salvation or creation or these important biblical doctrines? And at the end of the day, Christians have recognized there's different ways to think about that. So theologically, whether we're alone in the universe, I think is an open question, which makes it very fun to investigate, because scientifically it's an open question as well.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing us back to that point, because when we're talking to our non-Christian friends, we don't want to exude a posture of fear. That discovery is something to be afraid of. Rather, reasons to believe we're always trying to foster an environment of curiosity. That
Absolutely.
God's creation is good, and it's created for us to explore. He's created us in his image. I think part of what it means to be created in the image of God is to go out and be curious and explore the universe. And part of this is discovering those planets.
Absolutely. And what I find is that very often this discussion is set up as that if we find life on other planets, that means the naturalists are right, the Christians are wrong, and you just go home. As I looked into it, that was what was really exciting, is that whether there's life or not, I now have this tool to be able to engage people, whether they think there's life out there or not. So if they think there's life, now I can talk about, well, as a Christian, Christ died for our sins. How would that play out with Christianity? And you notice we're now having a discussion about the gospel without me having to convince them we're the only life in the universe. Or similarly, if we're the only life in the universe, isn't it remarkable that God created this whole universe so that we could be here to see his creation? And again, we're talking about important theological issues, which as a Christian, I want to be able to share the gospel. So whether there's life or not, I get the opportunity to share the gospel.
So if a UFO lands on the White House lawn, Christianity doesn't collapse, it's okay?
No, and I think the key question was, let's go talk to the UFOs and say, what do you know about God? The presumption is they're going to say, oh, we don't know anything about God, and that would show Christianity wrong. But if God is who he says he is, when we ask that question, they're going to say, well, there's this God who created everything and he wants to interact with us. And that would affirm what the Bible said all along. So I think it's a great question and a fascinating discussion to have with people.
In fact, you've written a book along these lines. Why don't you tell us about that?
It's a book called Is There Life Out There? And it just investigates how well Earth is designed to host life, but what happens when we look at the multiverse? Might God have created? Just all these questions surrounding the existence of life in the universe, and how as a Christian we can be equipped to go share the gospel given our latest scientific knowledge about all those issues.
So are we alone in the universe? I think what your answer is maybe, maybe not, but it all leads to a conversation about the cross.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. And I want to encourage all of you to check out Jeff's blog. It's called Impact Events, where he connects the latest scientific discoveries and news conversations related to science to the Christian faith. And you can check that out on our website at reasons.org. And now let's go over and see what Monica's up to. She's talking to Hugh Ross today about the Creation Day 4 and his very important book, Navigating Genesis. Let's check that out.
Hey, I'm Monica Jones, and today I have Reasons to Believe founder Hugh Ross here. And you may have seen that there's a recent report out that verifies this haze in the early part of Earth's history. Now, Hugh, you have a blog that talks about that and how it relates to Creation Day 4. So for people who may not know what this means or what it's about, tell me about it.
Well, chances are they haven't seen it because it was published in the Astrophysical Journal just a few weeks ago.
Oh.
But it's a discovery making the point that we now have a way of accurately measuring the oxygen content in the atmosphere of its history. Okay. And they did some lab experiments on what happens to the atmosphere given the quantity of oxygen. Basically, they said, as the quantity of oxygen in the atmosphere goes down, the atmosphere becomes progressively more hazy. Okay. Basically making the point that before the first animals showed up on the earth, there was so much haze that creatures on the surface of the earth would not be able to see the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Genesis says. Genesis says, Creation Day 1, let there be light. Mm-hmm. And that's when light first comes through Earth's atmosphere. Creation Day 4, where it says, let there be the great lights, is a reference to the time when creatures on the surface of the earth for the first time can see the position of the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, and therefore determine what season they're in, and they can regulate their biological clocks. So now we have scientific evidence, very strong scientific evidence, that verifies the detailed description and the chronology in Genesis 1 is correct. So this really goes a long way to giving us more proof that the Bible has predictive power, which means it must be inspired by the one that did everything.
Right, right. So you have your book, Navigating Genesis. What else can we find in there that relates to this?
Well, in Navigating Genesis, I take you through the 6 days of creation. Okay. and the latest scientific evidence that gives us confidence that what is written there thousands of years ago is both accurate and in the right chronological order. This new discovery basically nails that really big time. And I wrote a blog on it. People can go to reasons.org and go under Explore. And if they look for Creation Day 4, they'll be able to find the blog that I wrote and actually be able to read for themselves, at least the abstract to the research paper that where they reported this amazing discovery.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Hugh. I love having you on, and happy recent birthday.
Thank you.
So if you guys want to check out Hugh's book, Navigating Genesis, we have a sale, 50% off from now till August 19th. You just got to go to shop.reasons.org and use HAZE50 as the promo code. I hope you'll get your copy. See you next time.
Hello, Jeff Zweerink here, and welcome again to Give and Take. This is the segment of the show where we explore challenging and interesting scientific questions to help equip you to be more confident in sharing your faith. Today we're joined by a special guest, Mike Strauss, and we are going to investigate what he thinks is the strongest evidence for the truth of Christianity. Mike, it's good to have you here today.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I know you're a particle physicist. Kind of briefly tell us, what does a particle physicist do?
Well, we try to study the most fundamental structure of the universe, which is made of particles like quarks and leptons, and therefore the name particle physics. I do my research at a major international lab in Geneva, Switzerland called CERN, where we fire protons together, see the debris that comes out, and understand the structure of the universe.
So you work at CERN. This is where they discovered the Higgs boson, or the God particle, if you will. Were you involved in that at all?
Yeah, the collaborations at CERN are huge. I work with the Atlas collaboration, so my name is one of the 3,500 or so on the discovery of the Higgs boson paper.
So you're in the list.
I'm on the list, right.
Well, like I said, I'm excited to hear what you have to say here. And I want to throw the question over to you. What do you think, scientifically speaking, is the most powerful evidence for the truth of Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question. The one thing I like about Christianity is there is evidence for it. And I think from a purely scientific viewpoint, to me, the most compelling evidence is that we now know that this universe had a beginning. If we lived 100 years ago, there would be no evidence or even the thought that there might be evidence in how this universe started. But over the last 100 years, all of the observational evidence and theoretical calculations point to the fact that space-time, matter, and energy of this universe came into existence. And so that clearly points to some kind of transcendent cause of this universe.
So let's explore that a little bit. Your comment about how you live 100 years ago, scientists thought that the universe was infinite, eternal, it existed forever.
Yeah.
And then, today the idea that the universe has a beginning really is almost not a controversial idea in some sense. So what do you see as some of the strongest evidence supporting that?
Yeah, from the observational point of view, there's three major pieces of evidence. The universe is expanding, so it must have started to expand. We can measure the temperature of the universe. When the universe started, it was very hot and very dense. And like a hot oven that dissipates heat throughout the house, we see that residual heat. It's called the cosmic microwave background radiation. And then also we can exactly calculate the number or the percentage of light elements, things like hydrogen and helium. And these three pieces of observational evidence have just made it, very conclusive that this universe had what we call a Big Bang origin.
So those first two kind of make a little bit of sense. Briefly, can you describe why these light elements, how does that point to there being a beginning? Yeah,
so most of the elements that we know in the universe, carbon and oxygen and silicon, were not created at the very beginning. At the very beginning, within about the first 3 minutes of the universe, the only elements created at the Big Bang were hydrogen and helium and a few other very light elements, maybe some lithium. And our theoretical calculations, our computer models, tell us exactly how much hydrogen and helium we should see in the universe. And what we see agrees to the calculations to about 1 part in 10,000. So it's a very well understood theory of how these light elements were created in the Big Bang.
So this really, that measurement of the amount of those elements points to Big Bang cosmology being an accurate description, and the beginning flows out of Big Bang cosmology.
Yeah, in fact, it's really amazing that to this kind of order of 1 part in 10,000, our Big Bang cosmology simulations exactly agree with what we see in the universe.
It really is remarkable. So let's kind of shift gears there a little bit. I think there is a lot of strong evidence. How do you use this sort of information, engaging people who don't believe in Christianity, to show them that Christianity is worth listening to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most people have heard of the Big Bang. Most people, I think that somehow the Big Bang is an atheistic theory. We don't need God. But in fact, the Big Bang points to just the opposite. If everything in this universe came into existence, space and time and matter and energy, then the cause of this universe can't be part of the universe. It has to be apart from the universe, not made of space, time, matter, and energy. Something that theologians would call transcendent, or even the dictionary would call it transcendent, right? So we have this transcendent cause. The evidence from science points to the fact that this universe had a cause outside of the universe. And that's something that theologians have been saying forever, that God created this universe, and now science comes to the exact same conclusion, that this universe had a cause that's completely consistent with the idea of a transcendent God. That would have been unfathomable to say that 100 years ago.
It really is remarkable, considering you can make a reasonable case that science has spent a long time trying to figure out how to get around a beginning, if you will. The idea that we end up with this model where there's something outside the universe that brings it into existence in a way that aligns with the way the Bible describes things, that really does seem to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think scientists are still uncomfortable with it. The theological implications are so strong that scientists are continuing to look for ways around the fact that this universe has a beginning. But the cool thing, too, is not only does the observational evidence point to it, so do theoretical calculations. Whether you use general relativity for your calculation, or this theorem that was developed by Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin called the BGV theorem, all the theoretical physics also points to the fact that the universe had an actual beginning.
So as you use this, or somebody would go out and say, hey, it looks like the scientific evidence points to a beginning and do this, what sort of pushback, or how do people who don't want to engage that respond? What sort of criticism do you get?
Well, it probably comes in two ways. There are some people who want to try to still remove the beginning. Stephen Hawking's no boundary condition, which he wrote about in A Brief History of Time, is trying to remove an actual beginning. But it doesn't really do that. I mean, we could get into the details. It still requires a beginning. And then the other way to try to get around it is to say, well, maybe the beginning is caused by some natural phenomena. Larry Krauss's A Universe from Nothing kind of points in that direction. We have this natural emergence of the universe from nothing. And both ideas have lots of problems we could talk about.
Well, it still seems like even if you do go that route, you still end up with a beginning, which is remarkably consistent with how Scripture describes the universe.
Yeah, one thing I've pointed out to people is, if I'm a Christian who believes the Bible is true, what the Bible tells me is that this universe, our space-time, matter, and energy, had a beginning. In the beginning, God created this universe. And in fact, that is now completely confirmed by science. No matter what happens, you can't get away from that. So even if we were to push back and say, well, what was there before the beginning of this universe? The statement of Scripture has been confirmed by science, and I think that's powerful evidence for the truth of Christianity.
As we look at this creation, if God is the creator, we would expect the Bible to give us an accurate description of what this universe looks like. And when we look, despite some of scientists trying to get around what we see evidence for a beginning, that this universe began, and the Big Bang describes that well. I know Mike has written about this in his book called The Creator Revealed, and I would encourage you to get that book and explore that in more depth so that you're more equipped to understand the evidence for the beginning and how you can use that to spread the gospel with those you know.
All right, that does it for us this week on 2819.
We hope that you've been really encouraged as you've been watching to now go out and share your faith and to do so with confidence and compassion.
And remember, if you feel led to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget to follow us, like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show. Let us know what you think of the show.
We'll be looking for all those likes and comments. See you all next time.